something happening here. But what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children.
Hi, I'm Jean Stacy, and with me is Carla Newbury. We're going to be talking today about Occupy and our various paths to arrive there and what we've been finding out since we've been there. Carla, what were you doing before occupying 24 hours a day?
Well, before the Occupy in Eugene began, I was theoretically retired. And by theoretically, I mean just that. I retired actually from Lane County Mental Health, where I had been for 5 years. I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
Okay.
And retired almost a couple of years ago. And kind of looking for something to do and not finding that passion. And I'm a social worker. Social justice is my thing. I'm very impassioned with that, but I hadn't found a place to put that passion. I had actually gone through the entire application process and been approved by the Department of Defense to go do counseling at different military bases around the world for troops who were coming out of war zones. But my availability and their need did not coincide, so I never got sent. So I was kind of getting bored sitting at home playing video games on my iPad and watching reruns of NCIS.
Oh.
And I read about the Occupy movement in New York, and I thought, I wonder if there's something locally. And I went on Facebook, and there was.
There it is.
And so I came to my first GA was the third GA that had been held, and I was immediately enamored and in it 100%.
You have been. I've seen you often and passionate.
Yes, I tend to get very passionate. So what about you? How did you
Somewhat similar. I had actually retired, though, over 10 years ago, and had sold my business. I was a museum consultant, and we'd also designed and built exhibits for science centers and children's museums. So when I sold my business, I traveled for a number of years, and I had done some consulting work down in Bolivia. And so I gained a partner down there, and we've been traveling back and forth between Bolivia and the States in recent years, spending our time about half and half. And there's some frustration to be itinerant between two places that are so distant, and that it's very hard to get very committed into any particular arena. But I was extraordinarily frustrated when you leave the country and you're able to look back at us from foreign eyes. It's uncomfortable at best. And I, who had won a speech when I was 16 it was a contest about why you're proud to be American. And I had won the contest. And it really came to me very strongly that I could no longer write that speech.
Wow.
I was not indeed proud to be an American. I was very dissatisfied with what I saw going on, and also very alarmed, and I felt incredibly impotent to do anything about it. So when I heard about all these young folks up in New York at the occupation doing something so outrageous, right splat in the middle of Wall Street, my only thought was, I've got to go. I've got to be part of that. I've got to help that. I may not have the ideas, but I can give this support. And so that's what brought me to Occupy. It's just, hallelujah, somebody out there is willing to look at reality and do something about it.
And it's interesting, the incredible resonance that happened immediately of going, this is significant. This is going to be part of history.
Yes.
That was the reaction I had.
It's going to change history.
And I thought, I want to see it from the ground floor. And there were times when I wished I could actually be in New York.
I know. But in this country, I speak as if I'm an authority. This is my first protest ever. But in this country, so many of the important changes have trickled up from the grassroots. Grassroots is really where it is. So yes, we all want to, go to Washington and be part of Occupy or be in New York, but it's the combination of this huge mass of people that is going to make the changes that we need.
Mm-hmm. Well, and locally there's something very sweet about becoming involved, even though we're such a backwater, and although we tend to forget that.
Yeah, by choice.
But still, I really do believe that what you do in your community matters. It
Yes.
makes a difference, even though we're not the huge hundreds and thousands of people that you get in New York on any
Right.
given day. The fact is that our local efforts are just as important. And that solidarity, that, popping up of Occupies all over the nation
Right.
and then all over the world. I was just astounded, and I get thrilled when somebody would post something on Facebook saying, Occupy Antarctica, with a sign
Yes.
out there on the ice
Right.
floe.
Yeah, that's very exciting, and you never know what the pivotal moments will be. The war in Vietnam, the pivotal moment was the child screaming, running from the napalm. And the civil rights movement, pivotal moments, was where all of society was thinking, or in the South, all of this is okay. Little black children should not be in school with little white children. It was the mayor thought so, the council thought so, the school board of education thought so, the governor. Everybody was behind segregation, and everybody felt so justified about it. And then the fire hose, and the small children going to school and being blasted with that fire hose. That was in a small town in the South.
Yeah.
Not tiny, but,
Yeah.
and that changed,
Yeah. When
everything.
When you see injustice on that outrageous a scale, you have to wake up.
It wakes you up to Michael Jackson, who had so many songs that we never heard, that were some of the really more meaningful words, and his Man in the Mirror song. It wakes you up into the man. You look on the TV and you see what somebody else is doing, and you remember what you might have thought just 5 minutes before about the person that it was being done to, and which was okay and what wasn't okay, and it's all changed. It's rewritten.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's interesting for me because at this time in my life, and actually for over 30 years, I've self-identified as a hippie. Well, now as an old hippie. But it wasn't always thus. During the 60s, I was a middle-class housewife and living in the San Joaquin Valley in California. And our media there was very controlled. There wasn't a whole lot of impetus other than what I saw on CBS and NBC and ABC. And people forget there were only 3 networks back then.
Time.
And it was actually Kent State that woke me up. And I remember seeing that picture on the cover of every newspaper in the country and thinking, my God, now they're shooting our children. And I noticed that not only had I drawn the line, I noticed which side I was on. And it was definitely an us and them thing. And I noticed that the government and the status quo had become the they, and everybody on the other side was us. And I don't like the us and them paradigm in a lot of respects, but that was, for me, the defining moment where I thought, wait a minute, something is terribly wrong here.
Yeah. And I came from almost an opposites approach. I clearly and ashamedly recall as a high school student, back in the late 50s, early 60s, that the African American people in the South were beginning to want to do sit-ins at the restaurants. And I thought of my own family. I thought, well, when we go in a restaurant and if the waitresses aren't really nice, we want to leave. And I really couldn't understand why black people would want to go in a restaurant where they weren't welcome. That is how totally oblivious, how totally ensconced in the beliefs all around me.
You were very
I
acculturated.
was.
Yeah.
Very, very, very. I mean, I was country club, junior league, debutante, and I was a very good learner. of all these things. And it
You
took
were
me
junior
many
league.
years. Oh, yes.
I was too far away. I was in Lindsay, California, and the closest chapter was Fresno.
Well, see,
so that's the only
deprivation.
reason. And I was invited to be a debutante, but I declined
Yeah.
because even
Well, you
back
know,
then
yeah.
I had some inkling that there was something amiss in that social stratification
Right.
and that elitist approach.
Right, and the junior leagues or these other organizations do wonderful things.
Yes, they do.
But they do them from a perspective that I think we've seen wonderfully destroyed as being the best structural relationship between people who are able or in a position to help other people and the people. That, to me, at Occupy has been the most wonderful thing, is the horizontalness of all of our relationships at the site and now in our new structure, is that it's not just me helping you, but it's you helping me back.
Yes.
And us sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I helped each other with many things.
Yes.
You know, we had new friends. You were a new friend to me, but other new friends that perhaps came from the streets, that so much of it was reciprocal help and friendships. I've gotten more wisdom.
Right,
Because
right,
the greatest
right.
realists in the world are the people who are living on the streets.
Yeah.
There's no room for pretend. There's no room to kid yourself into thinking things. Money's going to come down the road or somebody's going to help you. That's over.
I remember years ago, I was at a rainbow gathering, and one of the kind of hardcore guys, he was upset about something, and I remember him exclaiming, "I may be ragged, but I'm real." And that really,
Amen to that.
That really struck me, and I thought, okay, so how do I undo the acculturation that I grew up in, that privilege that I grew up in? We're really outing ourselves here, Jim.
Yeah, I know.
I hope we haven't lost all credibility.
Right.
But, you know, I think that awareness of privilege is really, really, really important. And trying to look at ways to not erase it.
Oh, no.
Because it's there. It's a very real part of the problem with the dynamics in this country. And so how do you, and I don't even know what the term would be, compensate or flip it on its ear? I don't know.
I don't either.
How do you truly democratize yourself so you really are meeting people where they are instead of coming from where you are, which is, you know, I was pretty damn clueless. Oh, excuse my language, I don't think I'm supposed to say that. I was pretty clueless for many years, and it took me a long time to really understand all the influences that I grew up in, and truly
It seems so normal.
Right. And then instead of simply reacting against them or to them, becoming truly independent of those influences.
Right. And it's like trying to become independent of the air around you almost.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's so pervasive. One of the first things that struck me is we had been in the encampment for at least 2 months, and we went to a city meeting to talk with some city folks about the first task force to work with the homeless. And I went with a whole bunch of people I'd known well for 2 months. And I realized I did not know one of them's last name. I did not know what one of them had been doing before they got to Occupy. I certainly had never told anybody. I didn't go say, "Hi, I'm Jean."
Right.
And what did you used to do? Well, what did you used to do? It didn't happen.
And
but when we
because it
got there,
doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. But when we got at the table with the people who work for the city, for the first time I introduced myself as I'm Jean Stacy, and I had to position myself, I felt, for credibility for the first time in 2 months. And I'm a long-range planner.
Right.
It was,
Right.
I thought, how startling and how much that is a part of our lives before, is that you were always having to identify yourself by some standard you had reached.
Right, to make
when you
sure,
meet people,
right,
to be sure you got respect.
And to make sure that those doors remain open to you. And it's, I don't know, I'm pretty ambivalent about that because being a social worker, having worked at Lane County Mental Health, and then before that at Whitebird, and having worked on Cahoots, and I was one of the inaugural members of the police commission and stayed for an entire 8 years until I was term limited out. There's a certain there are doors that are open to you.
Yes.
And certain credibility you automatically have that other people don't have.
Whether it's called class privilege or white privilege or whatever.
And my grandson and I were actually talking about that and how in particular wealthy people have so much power. And I said, but of course, not all wealthy people abuse that power.
Absolutely not.
I said, and so the question is, how do you use your powers for good? And not even, I'm talking to a 9-year-old here.
Yeah.
And I said, so what do you think gets in the way of people using their power for good and not evil? He said, they're under some form of hypnosis.
Oh.
And I thought, okay, I know he means it differently than I do.
Yeah,
but you know, it's still a very apt
absolutely.
metaphor. People are really under some form of hypnosis, partly because they really don't have the information or they don't have the breadth of experience.
Right.
But they are also very, very much conditioned by the media and conditioned by the culture around them and the social values of whatever, and I hate that word class, but it's
a reality.
It's a reality.
And we have less mobility in this country between classes than we've ever had.
Yeah. So those are all things that I always have in my consciousness when I'm weaving in and out of whatever context I'm in, because it's important for me to be effective in my work. I want to be effective, but I want to be effective not just with the people in power, but I want to be effective with the people I consider to be my peers, who are the occupiers.
I know. I was laughing so hard because the other day I was giving a speech at a local club, and I thought, I'm getting a little bit nervous here. I'm usually not nervous, and I realized I was nervous not because of the professional folks that I was going to be talking to, but because a lot of the folks from the camp were coming. And I thought, I so don't want to slip into the place where I was before and speak from that place. I want to speak from where I've grown to. Here, and they're going to know whether I'm doing it or not. So the judge was right there. And so it's something very important to use those things that we bring forward, because it's all this wide breadth that is brought to the Occupy, and it's what I've enjoyed most.
Me too.
Is just the people.
And I did find myself the other day talking about, I was getting dressed in kind of my nice little professional clothes to go to the city club speech and lunch. And I said to somebody, you know, really, because I rub elbows with those people very well. And I thought, oh my God, what did I just say? Those people, us and them, about people who are professional, and the people in City Club tend to be very open-minded and very intelligent. It's a wonderful group, but when I found myself putting myself in opposition on a class basis to them, I thought, you know, is this really where I want to go to? It's a really important question.
I think it's almost where we want to be sure we don't go, because that's where we've been.
Right.
You know, we're looking so much at trying to find some empathy and some understanding for each other.
And I don't want to create an us and them.
And you don't.
At all, with anybody.
Right.
And that can be a real challenge.
But language is a tool.
Yes.
You know, and as long as we trust each other in how we're using it, then there's a lot of leeway. And I think that's one of the things that Occupy is going through right now, is because so many of us were so preoccupied with the camp, and then there's all the folks who also work through Facebook primarily, and then there's who work in actions and communications. And now we're all having more opportunity to interact. And it's brought good things and bad things. So often when you start bringing these little mini cultures together, you know, there is some fractioning. And it has to happen, though, because that's what exposes and kind of moves out of the way as it gets resolved, the things that do, in fact, stand between us.
Our preconceived ideas and unexamined prejudices.
And I'm so excited Now that we are without camp, we have a lot of people who can work on other issues. There's a large group of us, you're one of them, who want very much to move forward with our advocacy work for the homeless. I think that's really, really important. But I'm also really, really want to go to the what they call radical activism, which is not being extreme in your behavior, as I used to think, but going at the root of the problems, the big problems that are sinking us. And I am so glad that we now have the time, and now we need to gather the skills to do that. Activism is not safe work. It's not easy work.
And it's not comfortable always. It's I love
Tell
it.
me.
I love it. It's what I see in the eyes of the people around me is I see passion, and
Yeah.
I see devotion, and I see compassion.
Right.
I see love, which is, you don't expect that
No.
in a social or political movement.
Right.
And that's what's been so surprising to me, is the very real and very heartfelt love that
Yes.
exists among us.
Yes, that's been one of the big factors I think everybody has talked about. It really is the tie that binds, to use a very trite expression. It's very true. I mean, the first day I was out waving a flag, from the park blocks my little banner, I thought, what am I doing here? And the answer was clear. I've tried making political donations. I've tried contributing to good causes. I've done a lot of volunteer work.
Right.
I've written tons of letters. I've made phone calls. It hasn't worked.
Nothing really changes.
It hasn't worked.
Yeah.
And so I'm almost resentful in some ways that I am pressed into the position of, in order to get what I feel is absolutely minimally necessary changed in this country, I have to be what other people, my peers from before, are going to point at me and say, you were rude. That was rude.
Right.
And I said, yes, but the person I was talking to just killed 120 people in Afghanistan for absolutely no reason. Perhaps a little rudeness is necessary. If everybody won't play the game with mutual courtesy, and what the other folks are doing is so extravagantly bad, what must we do? Is it better to be polite and let them continue with what they're doing? Is that what the good girl does?
That's it, because I always feel that it's important to be polite and respectful. And I try to do that for a lot of reasons. But I don't mind if what I'm doing makes people uncomfortable.
There.
In spite of it. I am not here to make people comfortable.
Right.
That's
a big jump for me.
So you haven't done activism before?
Never in my life. I, was very busy with my own consulting business and that design build. Raised 3 children. No, 2.
Yeah.
Raised 2 children. Got 5 grandchildren in this country and 6 in Bolivia at this time. So I've always, been quite busy and really done a lot of things I've gotten to enjoy, but not terribly involved, or involved again through donations or through volunteerism or through persuasion.
Yeah, at a distance.
Yes, at a distance, a very comfortable distance.
Yeah.
So I found a lot of this very, very uncomfortable. But I'm getting my comfortable shoes on now.
Yeah.
It's too important.
Yeah.
You just can't always feel comfortable.
Yeah, I find that I'm in my element with something like this. It's security and comfort are very, very dangerous places for me. And I think they're very dangerous for most people. I really do believe that always living within your comfort zone is not healthy. It doesn't make you think, it doesn't make you change in healthy ways. And so I'm in my element when something like this happens, because I love the uncertainty. I love the newness.
Yeah, I like it when I'm on a sailboat tipping up on one pontoon.
Right,
but in
right,
the social
right. Yeah,
situation,
yeah.
you know, I think it still hasn't taken on the elements of thrill yet.
Right, right. Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think we do have to do is learn how to take those kind of iffy paths to make things happen. But it's going to be different.
Yeah. So you're way out of your comfort level on a lot.
Less and less so.
Okay, it's starting to feel more at home for
Yes,
you.
I think because I had become so outraged and still so ineffective. You know, when I match those two things up, you know, they say insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And basically, you know, that's what I was doing. So you have to try new things.
And along comes Occupy. So why Occupy? What?
It looked big enough, young enough, volatile. It's just on the edge of outlaw.
Okay.
That's always appealed to me, even though I couldn't do it.
Oh, okay.
So it's
you're
walking
actually,
the wild side.
You're getting
has
in
a
touch
certain
with
appearance.
your inner outlaw.
Yes, that's
your
right.
Inner outlaw. Yeah, I like
right.
that phrase.
And
your
for
inner
the
outlaw.
good, for the good.
Yes.
So it can be, you know, very justified and appropriate, but it still does have its uncomfortable moments, because there are times at which you really can't just work for the positive, I think, but you have to call out what you see that is not right. At some point you have to call a spade a spade. And so it suits my style in a way, but in another way it is very difficult.
Right. Yeah. And I got in touch with my inner outlaw years ago, just from accidentally. I think a lot of us become accidental activists purely accidentally.
Right.
But you know, I when I ran away with the hippies back in 1979 and went to my first rainbow gathering, I just fell in love with temporary autonomous zones, which is what the Occupy is. I love temporary autonomous zones. I love the horizontal structure that's run by consensus. And eventually doing gatherings, I found that I became much more political just doing that. That was not my intention. I was just a rainbow hippie space case. I was in my 30s. I was having a wonderful time. But eventually the Forest Service or the USDA wrote regulations that required a permit of the gatherings. And nobody would sign that permit. Yeah. And so all of us became targeted as, if anybody had stepped up to do anything. And I'm articulate, so, and I got a big mouth. So, I put myself out there. And in Rainbow, if you stick out your neck, somebody will try to take a swipe at your head. And, you get identified by somebody as a leader. And so they kept coming at us and coming at us and coming at us. And eventually, 5 of my friends have spent 3 months in federal prison for refusing to sign permits for the gathering. And I was one of the first people to refuse a ticket. And we really thought we'd win in court, which is why we were willing to take that risk. We so much believed that we were going to throw out the constitutionality of those regulations, and we were wrong. But the only reason I didn't get sent to federal prison was because they dropped the charges because a woman with special needs signed a permit on her way out of camp because she was afraid her kids would be taken away from her. And of course, this doesn't do anything in typical government fashion. What they did was did nothing to ensure what they said this permit is for, which is ensuring public health and safety.
But isn't that true, Carla? I think in our own situation at Occupy, that was such an eye-opener. For me, I actually was one of the police liaisons from Occupy to work with the EPD during the waning days. And again, I've always liked to think that the police are there to protect me and the police are there to help me. And we've certainly seen evidence that that's not always true. But the paradigm still held for me. And yet, as I watched those waning days, I realized that the police were not there to protect me. They were there with a mission to close the camp. It's a national agenda to close the Occupy camps.
Pretty much.
We've proved very big links between cities, the police departments, and each other. So we are not in the best interest of the powers that are running this country and who have a lot of authority over the police. And what I saw the police doing was not being true unto themselves, and into the knowledge that they had about the life of those who are homeless. The police know very, very well that our camp, to be a camp of 200 homeless people with the enormous problems that are had, was far calmer than had those identical people been out in the streets where they usually were.
Well, and I have no doubt that a lot of the individual officers were very conflicted.
They were very, and
No
that's what's so
question in my
horrible
mind.
is,
Yeah.
you know, the more that we as a system, and you and I are part of the system, ask good people to do bad things.
Right, right.
It was a shared responsibility. Once you get used to doing bad things, your own barriers against doing them start breaking down.
Well,
and I think we saw some of that.
Well, and I think there's also a rigidity in the system, and that was one of my frustrations. And ironically, the two areas where we had no problem whatsoever were not really, strictly speaking, city functions. Well, I guess kind of peripherally. One of them was the kitchen. Folks came out and made, the health department inspected, and the fire marshal came out and inspected, and they really worked with people to make sure that everybody had food handlers' cards, that everything was being done in a safe and sanitary way, that the propane tanks were not near the batteries. It was inconvenient, but they worked with us. They gave us the information that we needed, and they gave us enough time to come into compliance without getting nasty. Same thing with the Parks Department during our cleanup efforts. They were willing to negotiate the timeline so that we were actually able, and I don't know if the public knows this, but we cleaned that park up ourselves.
I think they do, and it was a beautiful job.
Yeah,
and you were
it was.
responsible for setting that in motion and inspiring it.
Because I learned that from the rainbow gatherings, and every year after the
Yeah.
gatherings are over, somebody goes through with the rangers, and there's a cleanup letter that goes into the file to
Right.
document that the cleanup
fact,
and
it
rehab.
was done.
And I realized that was one of the best things we could do, because it's the right thing to do for the land.
Absolutely.
It's the right thing to do to clean up after
And for
yourself.
the people of Eugene in
And
this
for the
situation.
people of Eugene,
Right.
absolutely. But the Parks Department let us do that. They actually were the ones that, when they said, well, you have to be out by 5 today, you have to be out immediately. And Martin put something up on Facebook. So I went down, and I you get to know, well, who are the guys in charge? So I walked over to the guys in charge, obviously, and I said, so we really need more time. They said, okay, so you have until 5 tonight. I said, can you give us until tomorrow? Because I looked at what was left, and I knew we could do it by 5 the next day. And they said yes.
Yeah.
Now we're still in negotiations
About the further
on
work.
on rehab and perhaps doing native species and community gardens, but that's kind of on hiatus right now. We have
and
better fish to fry, and parks closed until
Yeah.
April. But those two areas, they were willing to work with us. What was frustrating is that even though we continually asked, for electricity. We asked for a pigtail at our expense so that we could have electricity on the site to brighten up those corners, because
Right.
we wanted it to be more safer. We wanted more
And to
light.
light our information booth and medical tent.
We could have used that. It would have been. It would have increased our safety. It would have increased our ability to function with our infrastructure. But we received no help whatsoever, either from EPD or the city, on those things.
Right.
Even though it was a continual issue, and that's what was frustrating for me, is that we got blamed for a lot of the safety issues, and then they put up those 4 stadium lights, which drove us all crazy. When all that was needed was a little bit of increased illumination, and they would not even dialogue with us on that.
Well, I think, frankly, and you might disagree with me on this, the lights in particular had been kind of promised to us early on and just never happened despite frequent. And it became apparent over time that it was intentional. I really do believe that there was a strategy that they were going to shut us down. And I speak now of the police more than of the city. I know there's some people on the city council that would have agreed with that and some who would not have. So what the police did is developed a strategy, and it was used throughout the country, to raise visibility of any criminality that is going on. Don't do anything to help prevent any of that. and then let them basically cook their own goose, is the way they were thinking about it. And it was really sad to see this happen, because we had such an incredible opportunity.
And it was so frustrating.
For society, all of us, to be looking in this little laboratory between these giant roads and open view, and seeing all kinds of people living together. John was feeding, Big John from the kitchen, with all the donations that were coming in.
The community really came together.
We were feeding, I think he said 72 cents a day per person or something, and a very high protein, almost double what Lane County Food for Lane County is able to do.
And
we had medics. We
tasty.
I know.
Good quality food.
I felt like I always had to slip a little money in when I ate there, but it was really delicious. But so much was going right. And they chose, along with the local media who cooperated for the sensationalism, to highlight everything that went wrong, even though all the downtown folks are saying, wow, there's wonderful downtown there. We don't have any of these problems.
Well, and admittedly, we had some security issues. But then the most logical thing would have been would be for the policy, because it comes from the policy end, not from the line officers. That's management staff. And somehow there was a breakdown, and perhaps we were as at fault as EPD was. I don't know, because I never tried to say, look, we have a security issue, let's sit down together and work this out.
Right.
I probably could have done that at any time. I've got those connections with the city, but now we'll never know.
Well, we'll know, and I think the police force was very duplicitous. During the waning days, as I mentioned, I was one of the 2 liaisons along with John Monroe. And we heard the police chief saying to the public, there's no deadline for closing, and to the city council, there's no deadline for closing. But John and I were having meetings with a lieutenant who was assigned to us, and he was checking in every few minutes. He didn't say anything to us that he didn't check with his superiors about. And first they said, oh, you have to close December 24th. We said, that's probably not a good idea. Christmas Eve, and the city... So they gave you
a firm deadline.
Oh, yes. The city is going to kick us out the 24th. That doesn't look good for the police department. And it's going to tear this city apart. You know, it might be great for us because we can say, look what creeps they are.
Right.
You know, but it's not good for the people living on the site, and it's not good for the city.
Creating unnecessary trauma.
So we said, please, not the 24th. And so he went away, and that night he came back and he met us out at the site, and he said, you're right, we're going to change to the 26th.
But with conditions.
And with the condition that we see a steady decrease in number of people and structures. We said, great. And as you know, we began breaking that thing down very rapidly. Then suddenly we went to a meeting with a lieutenant who said, tomorrow the social service agencies are going to be there to transition the homeless from the camp into programs. And we said, wait a minute, we were at a meeting, I think it was that morning, and all the social service agencies were there. They don't have any place to transition people to. Where are they going?
Right.
He said, well, they're going to be here to transition. We said again, where are they going? As Betty did at the city council, bless her heart. Where are they going? Because there was no place to transition them to. We were supposed to have much longer, at least to the 26th, we thought, to do some other things with our Adopt an Occupier program and whatnot. Well, the very next day they went out and pinned signs on everybody's tent, you must leave immediately, you have to go, the park is closed. Scared people to death. They'd been told they could stay together as a family until Christmas.
Right.
Well, the social service people didn't come out the next day at 11 as promised. I'm sure they were afraid to show up. I'm sure they felt kind of disabused for being put in position of going out to screen people for programs that didn't exist.
Right. Well, and Looking Glass did come out.
Oh, yes, quite a few of them did, but they came out in the afternoon.
Yes, but not until the afternoon.
And most of our people had fled by then, because if you're not going to be here tonight, you've got to go find some place that you can be hunkered down by 5 o'clock.
Which made cleanup very difficult on the people doing it.
And they left all their things.
There were at least 50 people who abandoned everything because they were scared and had nowhere to go. So you get those two things together, and you know, we managed not to get bulldozed. We managed to not create a huge trauma psychologically.
But it was traumatic.
In that respect, it was very traumatic.
For the homeless folks, and for all of us who had become family and who I felt so responsible, you know, negotiating with the police, I thought in good faith, about giving people a reasonable way to leave in a horridly unreasonable situation. And so I felt very betrayed personally, and I felt that the police acted, first they brought in all those spotlights. And they brought in the generators that ran all night.
Before they shut us down. That was
4 days before.
That was right after the council extended us, but allocated some monies.
Right.
And I saw what was happening immediately.
Yes.
I felt to my knee-jerk reaction was that this was retaliatory on the part
Absolutely.
of EPD because the city council had not followed their recommendations to shut us down immediately.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think it was their way of pressuring things to happen.
I'm sure it was.
Because they're classic concentration camp stress
right.
invoking techniques, the bright lights and the noise all night.
In psychology, it's called aversive stimuli.
Yes.
And I could see, and I'm feeling so ambivalent about this. And I actually told Chief Kearns this. I told him, you know, I hated what you did and how you did it. But I have to admit that you've got a really good strategist there. Because it made it easy for us to leave and hard to stay. And I think that they really, on one level, the intention of the city truly was to make us leave without a confrontation.
They did not want a confrontation because in a confrontation, only they could look bad. In a confrontation, we would not look bad. They would look bad.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it was self-interest that caused them to do that. And I'm not saying that it's good to have a confrontation at all. But what they did was unnecessary. It was unnecessary meanness. We were leaving. A small number of people would have stayed to do the obligatory arrest
Civil
me.
disobedience, right. I was kind of disappointed that I didn't get to do that.
That was going to happen. But they had actually, our lieutenant, who was working with us, I think in total good faith, said constantly, and I assume you're going to have some people that are going to want to get arrested. We said, yeah, we are. And he said, how many you think? We said, we don't know. He said, maybe 20, 30. We said, we don't know.
Right.
You know.
Yeah,
and so that to me wasn't necessary. What was totally abhorrent to me is that they used force, psychological force, that was totally unnecessary. We were operating in total
in good
faith.
Yeah.
And they still subjected the people who were homeless in particular to the indignity of having to rip through the first time for many of them they'd ever had possessions, maybe in 15 years. And now they've got a tent, a sleeping bag, and some donated clothes.
Right.
You know, and they've got what they feel is 20 minutes to go through all their worldly goods and flee because they're grossly intimidated by the situation. So I just thought it was so unnecessary to turn that into such a mean-spirited kind of thing. And that to me, well, the police chief from Seattle with the World Trade Organization, a lot of violence broke out there, and the police were heavily censured for provoking it. When he left a year later, he looked back on it and he said, how did I get so confused? I thought I was defending an intersection, that my job was to use my forces to keep an intersection open, our park. What my job is to keep people safe, not intersections, not parks. My job is to keep people safe. And I think that is where our police department not only betrayed the people in the camp, but they betrayed the instructions given to them by the city council. I think it was direct disobedience of the council's instructions, because the council said, let them leave as quickly and as peacefully as possible, as practicable. And the police department did not do that. They rushed us out and they used techniques again, that are classically, psychologically forceful.
And it was very confusing
Not necessary.
because it would change from 1 hour to the next.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I'm a housie. I didn't sleep there. You know, I'm old. I'm 65.
I slept there for a while, but I got sick.
Yeah, right. So I would go home, and stay in touch on Facebook, and so when I heard that people were being thrown out, you know, I live less than a mile away, so I like to say I'm commuting to the revolution, and I get in my car and I drive down there. Well, by that time everything had changed.
Right.
That no, you don't have to be out right away. No. But by that time, the people who had the living daylights scared out of them were gone, and as you say, leaving things behind that, you know, with no ability to plan, no ability to gather,
right,
no ability to even form affinity groups where they could watch each other's backs, because
I know,
you know, the Street Family Alliance has that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
They've got their family that they work together, and they always watch each other's backs. But a lot of people who came to us have been lone wolves, and for the first time they understood the value of living in community. Then had there been a little more time, they could have left with a new clan, new family, alliance of their own that could have helped them survive on the streets above survival level.
Above survival. And I think that's one of the things you and I saw happen so beautifully at Occupy, was all of us suddenly realized that we might be able to come to quick answers for what should be done for the homeless. But the people with the in-depth answers, the people with the real answers, were the homeless.
Right.
And I think that's
the
community city task force for the homeless that's kind of come out of this has a lot of homeless people actually serving as part of the task force for the first time, and very strong voices.
And informing our Occupy committee that then part of which goes to the task force and carries that farther. I didn't know that if you fall asleep in the library, once you're thrown out immediately and you fall.
Well, that's because if you and I fall asleep in the library, we don't get thrown out.
Do you think?
Yes.
Do you think? I mean,
it's the homeless who do, because of attitudes.
Because we look different.
We look different. We look like we belong with the other people who belong in the library. And I've talked to the security guards there, because I work with a service dog, as you know. And when I go in there with her in recent years, they always approach me and start talking to me about, what does my dog do for me? Does she have a license? There's no such thing as a license. And I said, listen, I know what you're doing, and I resent it. You use this technique to get homeless people out of here. And you're only doing it to me so that you can say you don't discriminate. And again, both security guards, I could just see them go like this, because they know what they're doing. I said, you know, you guys, I know you can't get fired for protesting what you're doing, but you can at least talk about how uncomfortable it makes you feel. You know. And it's my obligation to speak to you now, and it's your obligation to do whatever you can do without you losing your job, to do this, and I'm going to back you up with letters. But there's a program of harassment that goes on.
Right, and if you fall asleep a second time, you lose your library privileges for a year. And I didn't know that. I think, you know, it's just an injustice.
I know, it's my library that I love so much
and it's
to
a
go
wonderful
to.
Library.
You know, and
it's a wonderful library.
Everything has a little hole in it, you know,
it
somewhere.
And so much of it isn't based on any poor behavior. It's based on not exactly a NIMBY factor. You know, I can't have homeless people sleeping in the library.
Right.
Even though they're not doing anything wrong. It's the principle of that. I'm going, what principle are we looking at here? And that's just one of the many things that people without houses face, that the rest of us don't
just
know.
Don't ever have to face.
We don't encounter it. I've been surprised by a lot of the things that I've heard just recently.
Me too. And the hypocrisy that's used to cover up those things is what drives me nuts. The day that the council was to vote on shutting us down, and we knew they all would because someone had been dangerously injured, there instead of 3 blocks away.
Right.
The front page of the paper said, "Homeless welcome to come in out of the cold at the library and atrium." The hypocrisy of that, when we know what the policies are at the library, infuriated me. When we went to the meeting where they closed us, trying to put a Band-Aid on the fact that they were kicking 200 people out 3 days before Christmas, really angered me. That they would say, "Oh, well, we're going to vote to allow tents to be in the RV camping sites." And I said to them, "Don't do this. This is hypocritical. There's a 9-month waiting list for those sites. Saying that you're going to let tents in doesn't do anything. At least don't be hypocritical." And they also said, "Well, we're going to provide transition services through some warming centers." And they did, but it was for 2 nights. They took people out of a 2-month camp and put them up for 2 nights to make it look as if they were caring. Now, they are caring, but they don't have the resources and the will.
And I think the intention is good in the agencies that stepped up.
Oh, yeah.
Like St. Vinny's, I have no question that their intention was good. But it doesn't fulfill the same purpose that we were fulfilling, which was providing community. And this is the thing it's hard to communicate to people. The empowerment I saw, and just for one example, there's a woman that, when I'm driving around town, I often see her highly intoxicated and yelling. She's always yelling, yelling. Well, and I saw her show up one night in our wonderful dome. Yeah. And I thought, oh Lord, is she going to just yell and take a lot
be herself,
of peacekeeping, which is, the peacekeepers were happy to do it, but I kind of rolled my eyes, which, was terrible of me. I shouldn't be rolling my eyes at anything, but, you anticipate social problems.
You just think, oh no.
Yeah, you think, oh no. Well, it was interesting because she and the other people that I've also seen kind of, chronically homeless, heavy alcohol problems. Often, you pass by and you notice that the police are out with them. And I thought, all right, but you know what? Not one of those 3 people that I have noticed for so many years ever created a social problem there. And in fact, the one woman, I watched her one night during GA, and her very first GA, she would go, "Oh, right on." She'd call out and interrupt. Yeah. Well, by her second GA, she was kind of getting the idea that that wasn't culturally appropriate. And at one point, she had a very good point when she was kind of shouting out in support. But I turned around and I went, "Yeah." And at that point, she decided, I guess, to really pay attention to that. And then I saw her really following the conversation. And at one point, she asked a question she waited to be acknowledged in the stack. She asked a question that was completely relevant to the discussion. And there was something behind her eyes I had never seen there before. It was self-respect.
Yes.
And I thought, this is transformational in a way that I don't think any of us expected. It's individually transformational, and I think societally transformational if we let it be.
Yes.
And to me, that's the thing that's missing out of the social service programs. They're offering a place to be or food, and it's wonderful. I'm not suggesting that they not.
Oh no,
the programs not do that. But the big challenge is how do you bring people in so that everyone feels like they're a part of something?
Yeah, and I think we did that beautifully. And I was talking both with Dan Bryant from First Church and with David Handelblatt from the Downtown Neighborhood Association, and he's also active with the dining room. And we were talking about these horizontal things. What was it that worked at Occupy? And they said, well, we're having some issues, how could we incorporate this? This was Dave in particular. And I was saying, well, they're having problems with folks out in the line getting unruly as they wait for food at the dining room. And so we talked about, what if you asked some of the leaders from the line to come in and ask them to be part of the team who is providing services. Let them be the host. Let them do some of the serving. Let them be part and equal to this. And then it's their leaders It's their peers.
Right,
It becomes
right.
more their place.
Right.
And how about if you take some of your volunteers who are so lovingly serving food, giving of their time, and ask them to come and sit at the table
Right.
and actually eat
Right.
with the homeless.
Right.
This is how we horizontalize things
Right,
in a little
right.
symbolic way at least.
Evening out the unequal power dynamic that is inherent in any social service
Yeah.
provision.
Right.
And it's, as a social worker, I mean, that's one of the things they stressed in graduate school the strongest, is you have to be aware that there's an unequal power differential.
Right.
You have to be so careful, never, never, never to abuse that position. But as an occupier, I go beyond that. I'm going, well, how do we get out of the unequal power dynamics
And
into something where we're...
It's a very important thing, and the whole attitude thing is so important. I speak sometimes with rancor about the decisions made at the council, but I think if all of us need to remember that with our council members, with the corporations that we make so rich by buying their things, we share half of that responsibility. Our responsibility now is to speak up against the corporations, and for those of us who are influencing our council members to do bad things, we need to stop. We need to think, why do I hate homeless people?
Right.
Why do I want them not to be warm? You know, and the council members, it's just like, you know, we talked about the little black child that was squirted with a hose. Somebody in that civil structure, that government structure, should have had the guts, as Betty's did, to say, this isn't right.
Right.
Just one person.
But the elephant is not aware that it's stepping on the ant.
That's why we
It
have
just
to raise awareness. And I feel like in Mike Clark's and in George Polling's neighborhoods, those folks who don't feel the way Mike and George do need to talk to Mike and George because the other people are talking to them.
Their peers, yeah.
We've got a lot of wonderful people in those two wards.
Right, right.
And I just want them to stand up and talk to Mike and George.
Well, and you know, at some point I thought, so why do they hate the homeless so much? And I thought, it was about 3 days into my asking this question, and finally I was like, oh, it's not about hating the homeless, it's about politics, and it's about looking for the next election cycle.
A part of it is. We got 30 seconds.
And it's really about the elephant stepping on the ant. They
Yeah.
don't know and they don't care that they're there, and that's the awareness we need to change.
And we will. Occupy is here to stay. We're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think smarter and smarter as we learn, as we've got so many newbies like me, and we're having to learn what we're doing. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with you and all the other folks that we're coming to know.
And we're still thriving and moving forward.
Yeah, and we'll see everybody soon.
Yeah, very good. All right. Thank you so much.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that?